The Dralethian warship Molten Vengeance hung in the void, like a blade suspended over a sleeping world. Its angular segmented hull pulsed with the dull glow of its forged core, casting an eerie orange, red light across the blackened metal. Commander Dralethian stood at the observation blister, his four clawed fingers resting against the reinforced glass. His black, chitinous hide absorbed the dim light, making him seem more shadow than flesh. Beyond the glass lay the graveyard. Hundreds of wrecked ships drifted in the silent embrace of deep space, their shattered hulls twisted into grotesque sculptures of war. Some were ancient, centuries old, their metal corroded by time and radiation. Others were fresh, their wounds still glowing with residual heat. The Dralethians had come to study them, to understand the battle that had taken place here. But Dralethian felt something else, a presence, a wrongness. His secondary eyelids flicked sideways, adjusting the spectrum of his vision. The wrecks were not just debris, they were arranged. Patterns emerged in the chaos. Ships had not simply been destroyed, they had been torn apart, their hulls peeled back like the flesh of prey. Some vessels bore the marks of energy weapons, clean, precise cuts. Others had been ripped open, as if by monstrous claws. Vashdor, Dralethian rumbled, his voice, a deep vibration in the dense atmosphere of the command deck. The scientist scuttled forward, his copper-plated exoskeleton clinking softly. His many-jointed limbs moved with the precision of a surgeon, his primary hands already manipulating a holographic display. "The damage is inconsistent," Vashdor admitted, his voice laced with unease. "Some of these wounds match known weapon signatures, plasma lances, particle beams, but others," he hesitated, "they resemble bite marks." Dralethian's spines flexed along his back. Bite marks. The archives spoke of such things. The old texts, the forbidden histories, the demons of the void. A proximity alarm shrieked. Dralethian whirled, his claws unsheathing reflexively. The tactical display flared to life, revealing a new contact, small, fast, and alive. It moved like a predator, slipping between the wrecks with unnatural grace. "Lock weapons," Dralethian ordered. The Molten Vengeance thrummed as its plasma batteries charged, their cores glowing like miniature suns. The unknown vessel did not flee. It slowed, stopped, and then it spoke. A transmission crackled across the comms, not in the guttural tones of Dralethian battle, cant, nor the harmonic frequencies of the other known species. It was human speech. "Unidentified vessel," came the voice, female, calm, edged with steel. "This is Commander Maya Sullivan of the Earth Defense Frigate Pale Horse. You are trespassing in a restricted zone. Power down your weapons and identify yourselves." Dralethian's blood ran cold. The demons had a name, and they were here. The bridge of the Molten Vengeance fell into a silence so deep it seemed to swallow sound itself. Dralethian's secondary heart thundered in his chest, a primal drumbeat of disbelief. The tactical display pulsed with the Pale Horse's signature, a sleek, angular silhouette, its hull a matte black that drank in the starlight rather than reflecting it. No Dralethian ship moved like that. No Dralethian ship dared to stop so close to a fully armed battlecruiser without shields raised. Yet this one had. Vashdor, the ship's chief xenologist, hissed through his mandibles, his copper-plated fingers trembling over the scanner console. "Their energy signature, it's wrong." His voice was a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon something unspeakable. "No plasma cores, no ion trails." Dralethian cut him off with a slash of his claw. He didn't need the scientist's panic. He needed answers. "Run a full spectral analysis," he growled. "I want to know what we're dealing with." The Pale Horse remained motionless, a shadow against the graveyard of dead ships. Its silence was worse than any transmission. It was a predator's patience. Then the scanners returned their findings. Vashdor's breath hitched. Their power source, it's fission-based. A ripple of disbelief spread through the bridge crew. Fission, primitive, unstable, the power of fledgling civilizations that hadn't yet mastered plasma containment. Yet the pale horse's readings defied logic. Its energy output was clean, controlled, magnitudes beyond what fission should allow. And then there were the weapons. Dralethian's crest of spines flattened against his skull as the data scrolled across his screen. Coil guns, rail accelerators, projectile weapons, yes. But scaled to nightmare proportions, munitions capable of punching through meter, thick battleplate at near relativistic speeds, and something else. Something the scanners couldn't fully resolve. A distortion wrapped around the ship's hull, like space itself was bending to shield it. Shields, Dralethian muttered. Vashdor shook his head. Not like ours. It's adaptive, reactive, as if it learns. A cold realization settled in Dralethian's gut. The archives had spoken of this. The demons didn't just fight. They evolved. A new transmission crackled through. You have 10 seconds to comply, Commander Sullivan said, her voice still calm, still human, or we will interpret your silence as hostility. Dralethian's claws flexed. Every instinct screamed to fire, to reduce this relic of nightmares to molten slag before it could remember what it was. But then the pale horse moved, and as it did, the graveyard around them woke up. Lights flickered in the derelicts. Ancient systems groaned back to life. And from the void, a signal pulsed, a single repeating transmission on every frequency, in every language, living and dead. It was a word, a name. Vashdor's voice was hollow with horror. There, not just here. He turned to Dralethian, his eyes wide with the weight of revelation. They're calling the others back. Section Fe. First contact protocol failed. The pale horse glided forward, its blackened hull drinking in the dim starlight. Dralethian's claws dug into the armrests of his command throne, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His ship, the Molten Fist, was a fortress of segmented armor and throbbing plasma conduits, a testament to Dralethian engineering. Yet, against this relic, this thing that should not exist, it felt fragile. The human vessel moved with eerie precision, its engines silent, its approach deliberate. Not an attack run, not a retreat. A statement. Vashdor's data. Screens flickered, his orange, lit face reflecting the scrolling terror of their sensors. Commander, he rasped, his voice thin with disbelief. The derelicts. Their power signatures are spiking, not just reactivating, sinking. Dralethian's secondary eyes narrowed. Across the graveyard, the dead ships shuddered. Ancient hulls, some half, melted, others torn open by forgotten wars, pulsed with sudden sickening vitality. Lights flickered, not the steady glow of Dralethian forges, but the cold, clinical white of human technology. And then the signal came again. The word echoed through the Molten Fist's comm systems, untranslated yet understood. It slithered into Dralethian's mind, carrying with it the weight of something ancient, something hungry. On the view screen, the pale horse's forward section split open, not a weapon, a mouth, a yawning black maw that disgorged a swarm of drones, sleek, insectile, their wings humming with distorted gravity fields. They moved like a living thing, a single entity with 1,000 bodies, spiraling outward in perfect formation. Vashdor's claws trembled over his console. They're scanning us, not just the ship, US. Dralethian's blood ran cold. The archives had spoken of this. The demons did not merely fight. They learned, they adapted, and then the human commander spoke again. Last chance. Sullivan's voice crackled. Still calm, still reasonable. Stand down. Dralethian's instincts roared. Every fiber of his being screamed to unleash the Molten Fist's arsenal, to drown this abomination in plasma fire before it could finish whatever nightmare it had begun. But then the derelicts answered. A dozen dead ships, human ships, flared to life, their engines igniting in unison. Not the sluggish awakening of dormant systems, but the instant, predatory response of something waiting. and from the void between them, a new shape emerged. Not a ship, a colossal skeletal construct of blackened metal, its fingers longer than dreadnoughts, its palm a yawning abyss of machinery. It reached from the graveyard's depths, slow, inevitable, as if the void itself had flexed. Vashdor made a sound no Dralethian should ever make, a whimper. "They're not just calling the others back," he whispered. "They're rebuilding them." Draltel's throat tightened. The archives had been wrong. The demons weren't extinct. They had been sleeping, and now, at the Pale Horse's command, they were waking up Section Fey, Scavenger's code. The skeletal hand closed around the wreckage of a Dralethian cruiser, its fingers curling like the legs of some great mechanical spider. Molten metal dripped from its joints, hissing as it struck the void, chilled hull beneath. The sight sent a primal shudder through Draltel's spine. This was not salvage, this was consumption. The Pale Horse hung motionless at the center of the graveyard, its jagged silhouette wreathed in the corpse, light of dying stars. Its hull, if it could even be called that, was a patchwork of butchered ships, fused together in a grotesque mockery of engineering. Draltel's tactical display flickered as it tried to categorize the abomination. The readings made no sense. Half its mass was listed as unknown composite. The rest, a shifting amalgam of Dralethian plating, human alloy, and something else. Something that pulsed like a living thing beneath the metal. Vashdor's claws scraped against the command console, his voice hollow. "They're not just rebuilding their dead." His ocular implants flickered as he magnified the image. "Look at the pattern." Draltel saw it. The derelicts weren't being repaired. They were being repurposed. Human cruisers, their gutted frames, still bearing the scars of ancient battles, were being stripped down to their skeletons, their components reforged into something leaner, hungrier. The process was horrifyingly efficient, like watching a swarm of mechanical carrion birds pick a corpse clean. A human frigate. Its hull split open like a gutted fish, disgorged its innards in a stream of molten debris, only for the Pale Horse's tendrils to catch the wreckage drift and drag it back into the abyss of its construction bays. And then there were the pods, dozens of them, clinging to the Pale Horse's underbelly like metallic cysts. Each one pulsed with a dull, rhythmic glow, their surfaces etched with the same jagged script Draltel had seen in the archives. The same script that adorned the tombs of the demons. His blood ran cold. "Those aren't storage units." Vashdor whispered. "They're coffins." A proximity alert shrieked. The molten fist sensors lit up as a new signal tore through the graveyard. A human vessel. Small, fast, its engines burning with the reckless fury of a dying star. It wove through the wreckage with impossible precision, its hull scorched black from atmospheric re-entry. Draltel's tactical display identified it instantly. Helljumper, class dropship, a boarding craft, and it was heading straight for them. Inside the Helljumper, Corporal Ryan Banks tightened his grip on the overhead rail as the ship shuddered through another evasive roll. The cockpit's emergency lighting painted the interior in bloody hues, flickering with each near miss from the Dralethian point defense turrets. 30 seconds to impact. The pilot barked over the din. Banks didn't respond. His helmet's HUD flickered, overlaying the Molten Fist's schematics across his vision. The Dralethians built their ships like fortresses, layered armor, redundant bulkheads, kill zones in every corridor. Standard doctrine said boarding one was suicide, but standard doctrine hadn't accounted for the Pale Horse. A proximity alert blared. The dropship lurched violently as something big shot past the viewport. A Dralethian interceptor, its cockpit reduced to slag by a single shot from the Pale Horse's spinal cannon. The wreckage tumbled past, trailing fire like a comet. Banks exhaled. "Remember the code." Commander Sullivan's voice crackled over the squad channel. "Scavengers don't ask for permission." The dropship's ramming prow slammed into the Molten Fist's hull with a scream of shearing metal, and then the world dissolved into fire and motion as the breaching charges detonated. Dralethian staggered as the impact rocked the command deck. Alarms wailed, their shrill cries drowned out by the groan of buckling bulkheads. The tactical display flickered, then died, plunging the bridge into darkness save for the emergency glow of the Dralethian rune lights. There inside, Vashdor hissed. Dralethian knew, he could feel them. The humans moved like ghosts, their armor, scavenged from a dozen battlefields, welded together in blasphemous configurations, absorbed the light, turning them into silhouettes with glowing eyes. They didn't speak, didn't shout battle cries, they just killed. A Dralethian marine lunged his plasma pike, humming with lethal charge. Banks sidestepped, his weapon, a hybrid monstrosity of Dralethian disruptor cores and human railgun tech, barked once. The marine's torso vaporized in a spray of molten chitin. Dralethian drew his sidearm. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They were here to feed, and the molten fist was the meal. Section Fae. The faith cycle. The molten fist shuddered again, its great industrial heart faltering under the relentless assault. Dralethian's claws scraped against the command console as he steadied himself, the copper plating beneath his feet warping from the heat of overloaded conduits. The air stank of scorched metal and ionized plasma, thick enough to choke on. Across the ruined bridge, Vashdor's cranial spines flared in agitation, his ocular implants flickering as they processed the carnage. The humans had breached the secondary bulkhead, impossible. According to every tactical projection, the fist's defenses were designed to withstand siege weaponry, to endure the molten fury of a dying star. Yet the humans had carved through them like rust. Dralethian's secondary eyelids slid shut for a fraction of a second. A reflexive gesture burned into his species by millennia of war. He had seen the archival hololiths, the ancient warnings etched in the obsidian vaults of the Dralethian High Forge. The demons of the faith cycle, a scourge that had once brought the galaxy to its knees before vanishing into myth. The archives had been wrong about one thing. The demons hadn't vanished, they had slept, and now they were awake. Banks moved like a shadow given teeth. His armor, a patchwork horror of scavenged Dralethian plating and human alloy, absorbed the ambient radiation, rendering him a wraith in the fist's crimson, lit corridors. The stolen disruptor cores in his weapon hummed, a sound like a starving beast growling in the dark. A Dralethian sentry rounded the corner, his segmented armor glistening with molten coolant. He never saw Banks. The hybrid rifle barked. The sentry's chest caved inward, his carapace folding like paper before the hyper. Accelerated round detonated, shredding him from within. Banks didn't pause, didn't celebrate. He simply stepped over the twitching remains and moved deeper into the ship, his HUD painting the way forward in cold, clinical vectors. Somewhere ahead, Sullivan was carving her own path, and the fist was bleeding out around them. Vashdor's talons danced across the emergency console, his voice a rasp of static. They've bypassed the reactor shielding. The humans, they're not just boarding us, they're rewriting us. Dralethian didn't need the scientist's panic to confirm what he already knew. The ship systems were unraveling, their carefully structured protocols collapsing under the weight of some alien intrusion. Human machine spirits, gnawing at the fist's nervous system like carrion worms. A proximity alert shrieked. The blast door groaned, then screamed as something on the other side tore through its molecular bonds like wet parchment. Dralethian raised his sidearm. The door exploded inward. Sullivan stepped through the smoke, her armor blackened by plasma burns, her visor a single unbroken glare of reflected firelight. She didn't speak, didn't demand surrender. She just looked at him, and in that moment, Dralethian understood. This wasn't a boarding action. This was an exhumation. The humans had dug up something old, something hungry, and now they wore its skin. Vashdor lunged, his sidearm spitting molten fury. Sullivan moved. Her armored fist caught the scientist mid-lunge, the impact cratering his thoracic plating before she twisted, her other hand driving a monomolecular blade up through his jaw. Vashdor spasmed, his death rattle lost in the hiss of ruptured coolant lines. Draltel fired. Sullivan's head snapped back, then righted itself, the plasma bolt dissipating against her visor, like rain against stone. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and tapped the scorched glass. A countdown, somewhere deep in the molten fist's belly, the reactors screamed, and the faith cycle began anew. The molten fist shuddered, not the familiar groan of stressed bulkheads or the rhythmic pulse of its forge. Core, this was deeper, a tectonic shift, as if the ship itself recoiled from what now walked its halls. Draltel's secondary heart stuttered in his chest, his carapace plates instinctively locking tight. He had seen war, had commanded fleets that scoured worlds to molten glass. But this was something else. Sullivan stood before him, Vashdor's corpse still twitching at her feet. The scientist's blood sizzled where it met the deck, eaten alive by the nanite swimming in the human's blade. Her armor drank the light, its surface, a void punctuated only by the faint pulse of crimson along its seams. Like veins, like something alive, the reactor's scream climbed higher. Draltel's tactical display flickered, then dissolved into static. His HUD spat warnings, radiation spikes, power surges, whole sections of the ship going dark. Not just offline, eaten. Something was rewriting the fist's systems from the inside out, subsuming its molten core architecture into a new, terrible design. He fired again. This time, Sullivan didn't flinch. The plasma bolt struck her chest and unraveled mid-flight, its energy siphoned into the black chitin of her armor. She took a step forward, then another. Each footfall sent tremors through the deck, the metal groaning as if in pain. Behind her, the bulkhead rippled, Draltel's breath caught. The walls were moving, not buckling, not melting, reconfiguring. The dark alloy twisted inward, forming jagged spines, barbed tendrils, structures that defied geometry. The ship was no longer Dralethian. It was becoming something else, something older. A voice crackled in his comms, Corporal Banks, his transmission laced with interference. "Commander, we've got HSSK." Whole sections just vanished. HSSK. They're in the walls. Then silence. Sullivan's visor flickered. For a fraction of a second, Draltel saw her face behind the glass. She was smiling. A sound tore through the ship. Not a klaxon, not an explosion, a chittering, like a million insectile mandibles gnashing in unison. From the shadows between the warping bulkheads, shapes emerged. At first, they were only silhouettes, twisted, elongated things that moved in jerking, unnatural strides. Then the light caught them. Draltel's blood turned to ice. They were human, or had been. Their bodies were sheathed in the same black armor as Sullivan's, but where hers was whole, theirs was broken. Limbs bent at impossible angles, necks craned too far. Some lacked faces entirely, their visors replaced by jagged maws of serrated metal. The exotroopers, the humans, had not just boarded his ship. They had infested it. One of the creatures turned its head, a smooth mechanical motion that ended with a sickening click. Its visor split open, revealing not eyes, but a cluster of writhing filaments, each tipped with a needle. Thin sensor, it tasted the air. Then it lunged. Draltel barely raised his sidearm in time. The plasma burst caught the thing in the chest, punching through its armor in a spray of molten alloy. It staggered, then kept coming. Its fingers elongated, splitting into segmented blades that scraped against the deck. Draltel backpedaled, firing again and again, but the rounds did nothing. The thing absorbed them, its armor healing between shots, the wounds sealing shut in seconds. Sullivan watched, unmoving, unconcerned. The exotrooper struck. Draltel's world became pain. The thing's claws punched through his carapace, burying themselves in the meat beneath. He screamed, his blood boiling where the nanites in its blades met his flesh. His vision swam, his limbs locking up as the poison spread. The last thing he saw was Sullivan stepping over him, her boot crushing his sidearm into scrap. Somewhere, deep in the dying ship, the reactors reached critical mass, and the dead began to sing. The Dralethian command ship Molten Vengeance shuddered as the last of its energy cores bled into the void. Orange, red plasma flickered through fractured conduits, casting jagged shadows across the ruined bridge. Commander Dralethian lay broken at the center of it all. His carapace split open, his blood steaming where the human monstrosity's claws had torn through him. He could not move, he could not breathe. But he could still see the human Sullivan stood over him, her expression unreadable behind the black visor of her helmet. The exo-trooper that had ripped through his warriors like paper now stood motionless at her side, its segmented armor still dripping with molten alloy and Dralethian blood. The thing was a nightmare-given form, a fusion of machine and flesh, its limbs ending in adaptive weaponry, its optics burning with cold, calculating light. And yet, Sullivan controlled it with nothing more than a glance. Dralethian's mandibles twitched, his mind clawing through the haze of pain. This was not supposed to happen. The Dralethian Dominion had ruled this sector for millennia. Their fleets had crushed empires, their forges had birthed warships that could withstand supernovae. They had studied the humans, watched their primitive conflicts, their crude attempts at spacefaring, and dismissed them as another fragile species, too emotional, too mortal to ever be a threat. Now, their greatest dreadnought was a tomb. Sullivan tilted her head, studying him, the silence stretched, broken only by the groaning of dying metal and the distant, rhythmic thud of boarding drones cutting through the last of the ship's bulkheads. Then she spoke. "You thought we were weak." Her voice was calm, almost conversational. But beneath it, Dralethian heard something else, something that made his remaining limbs tremble. Disappointment. She knelt beside him, her armored fingers brushing the edge of his shattered carapace. The gesture was almost gentle. "We were weak," she admitted. Once, the exo-trooper shifted, its optics flickering as data streams pulsed between it and its master. Sullivan didn't look at it. She didn't need to. "We burned our own world fighting each other. We clawed our way out of the dirt with knives and hatred. We built weapons that could end civilizations before we even left our own star." Her fingers tightened, and then we learned. Dralethian's vision blurred. The poison in his veins was spreading, his organs shutting down one by one. But he couldn't look away. Sullivan leaned closer. "You watched us. You studied us. You thought you understood us." Her visor reflected his dying face back at him. "But you never asked why we kept fighting." A tremor ran through the deck. Somewhere deep in the ship's carcass, a reactor finally collapsed, sending a wave of heat rippling through the corridors. The exo-trooper's optics flared, its systems recalibrating for the coming inferno. Sullivan stood. "We don't fight because we want to," she said, turning away. "We fight because we have to." The last thing Dralethian saw was the exo-trooper stepping forward, its claws extending once more. Then the world dissolved into fire, and the dead sang their final hymn. The molten glow of the dying reactor pulsed through the ruptured corridors of the Dralethian command ship, casting long, jagged shadows that flickered like the last embers of a forge. The heat was unbearable now, warping the segmented metal bulkheads, turning the once imposing fortress into a tomb of liquid steel and smoldering alloy. Dralethian's body lay broken, his carapace split open by the exo-trooper's final strike, his blood, thick and dark as molten copper, pooling beneath him. His vision swam, the edges blurring into the encroaching darkness. But even as his body failed, his mind clawed for understanding. The question burned hotter than the fires consuming his ship. The humans were supposed to be weak, fragile, a species barely clinging to the fringes of the galaxy, their history nothing more than a chronicle of self-destruction. The Dralethian archives had dismissed them, primitive, emotional, reckless. His thoughts stuttered as another explosion rocked the ship, the deck plating groaning like a dying beast. And yet, they had done this. The exo-trooper stood over him, its armored form silhouetted against the hellish glow of the corridor. It was a nightmare given shape, a fusion of human resilience and mechanical savagery, its optics burning with cold, unrelenting purpose. Dralethian's mandibles twitched, his last attempt at speech. The exo-trooper did not answer. It did not gloat. It simply watched, as if ensuring he understood the weight of his mistake before the end. Somewhere beyond the flames, the human warship Indomitable still loomed, its hull scarred but unbroken, its weapons silent now. Not out of mercy, but because they had already won. Vashdor had been right. The realization struck Dralethian like a plasma round to the chest. The scientist had warned him, had pleaded with him. They do not fight like we do. They do not think like we do. But Dralethian had dismissed it, had believed the humans would break under the weight of true war. A bitter laugh rattled in his thorax. They had not broken, they had adapted. The exo-trooper's claws flexed once, the motion almost contemplative. Then it turned away, its heavy footfalls echoing through the collapsing corridor as it strode toward the next battle, the next enemy, the next war. Dralethian's vision darkened. The last thing he saw was the flicker of human transmissions cutting through the static orders, coordinates, reinforcements. They were still fighting. They would always fight. And as the flames swallowed him whole, he finally understood the only lesson humanity had ever needed to teach. Survival was not a victory. It was a habit. Section Fey. Echoes in the dark. The molten glow of the Dralethian command spire flickered like a dying forge, its once imposing angular architecture now fractured under the weight of human persistence. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, the remnants of a battle that had not gone as planned. Dralethian's remaining warriors huddled in the shadows, their segmented armor cracked, their orange-red energy cores dimming. They had expected the humans to break, to surrender, to flee. They had not. Instead, the humans had done something far worse. They had learned. Vashdor, the Dralethian scientist, clutched a data crystal in his trembling claws, the archival records pulsing with forbidden knowledge. The ancient texts had spoken of a species that refused death, that clawed its way back from extinction's edge with teeth bared and weapons reforged. The archives had called them demons, and now the demons had returned. Commander Maya Sullivan moved through the wreckage of the Dralethian forward base like a ghost, her tactical visor painting the world in cold clinical overlays. The fortress-like structures, once imposing in their brutalist grandeur, now lay in ruins, their molten conduits sputtering like dying embers. Her footsteps were silent, her soldiers were not. Behind her, Corporal Ryan Banks adjusted the grip on his plasma rifle, his breath steady despite the carnage around them. The Dralethians had thought their industrial might would crush humanity. They had been wrong. They don't understand, Banks muttered, his voice barely audible over the distant thunder of collapsing metal. Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Dralethians had fought wars of attrition, of overwhelming force, of rigid hierarchy. Humans fought wars of adaptation. Vashdor's claws tightened around the data. Crystal the Record spoke of a time before the Dralethian ascendancy, when another species had risen swift, relentless, hungry. They had been purged, erased from history. Their names struck from the archives. The humans moved like them, fought like them, refused to die like them. Dralethian had scoffed at the idea, had called it superstition. But now, as the human transmissions cut through the static orders, reinforcements, victories, Vashdor felt the weight of truth settle upon him like a burial shroud. The demons had not been destroyed. They had only been sleeping. Maya's calm crackled. Commander, we've got movement in Sector 7, heavy resistance. She didn't hesitate. Flank them, cut their power, then burn them out. Simple. The Dralethians had built their empire on unyielding metal and scorching plasma, believing their industrial brutality would ensure dominance. But humanity had survived worse: ice ages, pandemics, wars that had scorched their own world black. They had learned to endure, and now they were teaching the Dralethians the same lesson. Vashdor activated the hollow projector, the ancient glyphs swirling in the air like embers. The record spoke of a weapon, one that had been used to purge the demons long ago. A final solution. His thorax tightened. If the humans were the demons returned, then the Dralethians had already lost, because the weapon was gone. And the humans, they were still here, still fighting, still winning. The last of the Dralethian defenders, braced as the human assault drones, breached the inner sanctum, their monomolecular blades humming with lethal precision. The fortress shook, its molten core destabilizing, its angular spires collapsing inward. Dralethian was gone, Vashdor was alone, and the humans. They were coming, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as the inevitable. The echoes of the past had returned, and this time they would not be silenced. The fortress burned. Molten metal dripped from the shattered spires of the Dralethian stronghold, its once imposing angular architecture now a skeletal ruin. The air shimmered with heat distortion, the orange, red glow of dying plasma cores flickering like embers in a dying forge. The walls, once reinforced with segmented armor plating, had been peeled open by human boarding charges, their brutalist machinery now exposed, twisted, broken, useless. Vashdor stood in the wreckage of the command nexus, his chitinous fingers trembling over the shattered remains of the hollow projector. The glyphs of the ancient archives had long since faded, their warnings unheeded. The weapon, the only weapon that had ever truly worked against the demons, was lost to time, and now the demons had returned, not demons. The realization was a blade in his thorax. He had studied them, observed their wars, their reckless expansion, their stubborn refusal to die. He had dismissed them as primitive, emotional, weak, just as the archives had warned against. But now, as the fortress trembled beneath the relentless advance of their war machines, he understood. The humans were not demons, they were worse. Demons could be banished. They came back. The first assault drone breached the chamber. It was a sleek, blackened thing, its armored carapace scorched from plasma fire, but still functional, still moving. Its optics glowed a cold, unfeeling blue as it swept the room, its monomolecular blades humming in the silence. Vashdor did not flinch. There was no point. The drone hesitated, then it stepped aside. A figure emerged from the smoke. A human clad in battle, scarred armor, her visor reflecting the dying light of the fortress. Commander Maya Sullivan. She did not raise her weapon. She did not need to. The fortress was already hers. Vashdor exhaled, his mandibles clicking in bitter amusement. You were supposed to be extinct. Maya tilted her head, studying him. Yeah, we get that a lot. Behind her, more humans moved through the ruins, methodical, relentless. Some carried weapons, others carried tools, already dismantling Dralethian systems, repurposing their technology, adapting, just as they always had. Vashdor's gaze drifted to the shattered viewport, where the void of space yawned beyond. The remnants of the Dralethian fleet drifted in broken, burning husks. The human ships, their ships, hovered like predators, their silhouettes angular, unforgiving. They had not come as conquerors, they had come as inevitability. You will not stop, Vashdor said softly. It was not a question. Maya followed his gaze to the stars. No, we won't. There was no malice in her voice, no gloating, just fact. The humans had been hunted. They had been broken. They had been erased. And yet, here they stood. Vashdor closed his eyes. The archives had been right about one thing. Some species refused to stay dead. Outside, The last of the Dralethian reactors collapsed in a silent eruption of molten fury, its light flaring one final time before fading into the dark. The humans did not watch it die. They were already moving forward. Section Fey Aftermath. The silence of the void was not truly silent. Debris tumbled in slow, chaotic orbits, the wreckage of the Dralethian fleet still glowing with residual heat, their molten cores cooling into jagged, lifeless husks. The humans did not linger to scavenge. They did not pause to claim trophies. Their ships, those sleek, brutal things, moved with purpose, their engines flaring as they regrouped, reformed. Vashdor watched them from the ruined bridge of his command vessel, his claws digging into the fractured console. His people had built empires on the bones of lesser species. They had crushed civilizations that dared resist, erased those who could not be broken. And yet, the humans had done the impossible. They had remembered. A transmission flickered across the remains of his comms array, not from the human fleet, but from the depths of the system. A signal, repeating, a beacon. His blood ran cold. It was a distress call, but not from the Dralethians, from the ones who had come before, the ones the Dralethians had thought long extinct. The humans had not just returned, they had awakened something else. And as the signal pulsed weak but undeniable, Vashdor understood. This was not the end. It was the beginning, far beyond the battlefield. In the dark between stars, something ancient stirred and listened.